Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Mind of Cy Marie. Today's episode is one that speaks straight to the heart of creativity, resilience, and storytelling, as always. I'm honored to be joined by Lyric Rivera, which is Neurodivergent Rebel for those who know, who I am so stoked to have here today. Lyric is the author of Weight of Normal. I just got to read it and it's excellent. I definitely feel it's a must read. Their work explores identity, neurodivergence, and the power of narrative to heal and inspire, which I found amazing. Lyric's writing invites us into worlds where personal truth and collective memory converge, offering both reflection and empowerment. Their journey as an author is not only about crafting stories, but restoring storytelling as a vital force in our lives. So, Lyric, welcome to the show. It's a joy to have you here today.
Wow, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and this is the first time I get to talk about this particular story, so really excited to share with you.
It's really awesome to have you on today too, because I know it's release day. So let's get right into it. Can you share the origin story of your journey into authorship and what first compelled you to write The Weight of Normal?
Well, since I was a very young person, I've always loved writing. And, originally when I was a kid, I wrote a lot of fiction, and I never thought that my own story was particularly interesting or anything anyone would want to have any like, why would anyone wanna read about me? I thought I could make up fantasy that would be so much more interesting, and then I was diagnosed autistic at the age of 29, which is 9 years ago now, and that was, for me, the start of a healing journey that, yeah, I'm still on. If I'm totally transparent, and I don't know if these kinds of healing journeys are things we ever stop going on. It's always a part of growth, but 9 years past learning I am autistic, and I have always have been autistic, and now coming to that point where I'm having a chance to reflect back over things and understand how much not knowing the truth and having unfair expectations put on me as a result of nobody knowing the truth about my brain has really been what inspired me to put a lot of this stuff into this book. And also, for me, it's, with my blog or any of the work I do, it's always wanting people to know that they're not alone and also being a resource that I need myself. And so all of that is a lot of why behind this book. And this one's really personal, more personal than any of the other books I've ever worked on or put out.
Well, I completely agree with you about the healing journey being, it's not a straight line, it's a constant journey. So I'm really glad to see that you're finding some pathway to healing through that expression. And with your work often exploring themes of identity, resilience, and neurodivergence, how did your personal experience shape that creative lens? And I know you kind of just touched on that, but is there any anecdotes you might want to share?
I think something that has really influenced the work I do and why storytelling is so important for me is I was that kid that really struggled in school, and that's definitely a big theme in the book is how I struggled in school, but it was treated like I was a problem. For me, I really think learning can be engaging and fun, and we are able to like really be involved with story and storytelling. It lets us absorb things on a different level. And as a kid, I think if more of the education was storytelling, it would have been better for me. So that's just kind of something in general that, that's really influenced me. Even when I do business trainings for corporate, I still use story as the tool to drive that home. And I think that's a little bit different about my work than other people out there who are doing work because it gets to be very formal PowerPoint presentation. These are the facts. But, there's just it's more interesting if we humanize things, and everything I do is trying to kind of humanize things that have unfortunately, parts of us that have been really dehumanized.
I can agree with that. What was the turning point when you realized that storytelling wasn't just a passion, but a vocation for you?
Probably fairly early on after I was recently diagnosed autistic and in my, probably I it was a few months before my 30th birthday. And when I'm in true, very stereotypic autistic fashion, when I found out about being autistic and about neurodiversity and just the fact that there were all these differences that many of our brains from person to person, I was really obsessed with it. And so I was really lucky when I was diagnosed that the person who diagnosed me offered me a list of books to read by autistic authors that were similarly telling their stories and lived experiences. And, reading those stories, it was a lot like that song Killing Me Softly. It was like all the things in my life that I thought nobody in the world could possibly relate to or understand was reading it on paper, but somebody else's life. And that was really powerful the way those other people were touching me and helping me find validation through a diagnosis that I was struggling to accept early on because there's just a lot of emotions and grief that goes from like, oh, I went 30 years of my life not knowing the truth about my brain. And so those stories were really important. But then when I went to Google and tried to find more because I read very fast and I digested them all, the stories were about autism, but not by autistic people. And I realized we need a lot more autistic voices telling our own stories. And so I started sharing my story as well.
And through that, you've cultivated a readership that resonates deeply with your themes. What does that connection look like in practice? And what stories from readers have most moved you?
Well, I'm really lucky, that now that I started being really raw and really authentic online, it has drawn the right people towards me. And that's something I'm only learning to do since my diagnosis because when I was diagnosed, I looked around and realized that I was alone in a sea of people, so to speak. There weren't people that really knew the real me because I didn't know how to be the real me. And I've been on this journey of discovering who the real me is. It's like that saying, "Let your freak flag fly," so to speak. And freak is kind of a harsh word, but I've been letting it fly, and the community that's built themselves around me is really amazing. And I don't know if there's one particular story that stands out, but what I do notice, because it's been 9 years, so there's a lot of stories of things people have shared with me, is that I've got people who are discovering their neurodivergence, whether it's autism or something else, and they're like, someone today, even today, was like, I'm 65 years old, and I'm just understanding what this means to me. And other people, like in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, people of all ages who are just now learning the truth about their brain, and voices not just like mine, other neurodivergent people who are sharing their stories have been so instrumental in that process for a lot of us. And so it's really just humbling to have my story be a part of someone else's journey and someone else's story. And just every time someone's like, your story has helped me, your work has helped me, it just makes me feel really humbled and really honored that I can be what I needed 9 years ago when I was trying to figure out what all this meant to me.
Yeah, and that's always really, I think, probably one of the most rewarding things about finding the courage to do this because you help other people do it too. And writing can be both solitary and communal in that way. So, how do you see technology and digital platforms enhancing the way authors connect with their audiences today?
For me with social media, it has just been amazing because it really is like, especially on Facebook, because the comments are closed and you have to actually follow and wait 24 hours or 48 hours. I'm not sure how the tech works, but like you have to become an established follower, whatever that means, to be able to engage in the community, which gives me time to protect and keep that space safe, excuse me, from people who might have not the best intentions. And so it's like we have this real nice little community space. And as a writer, I love that because this book here and then every other thing I do often is because the community is like, this needs to exist. Can you do this? Or, this doesn't exist, or we don't have this. Or the other thing that's really beautiful for me as a writer being online in the community is that my community is teaching me things every day. They are letting me know when I miss the mark and holding me accountable when I need to do better, and they make me a better person because of it. They've made me grow so much over the past 9 years, more than I would have been able to grow on my own without being surrounded by so many amazing people, because my readers are really amazing people, and it's really freaking cool that I've got to meet so many people online, and even we've had some meetups over the year where we've got together and done in-person hangouts, and we hung out at Garden of the Gods in Colorado, and we did some skate meetups in Texas, and they're really just as awesome in person as they are online, and that's really, really neat that we can have more of a community. Because I think in the past, it would have been like, "Oh, you have a fan club for an author or something," maybe back in the days before we were all online all the time, and I get to actually be in the comments with my community and with my readers, and that's really fun, and I have some little moderators in there that help me with things, but they have to reach out to me, and then I have to go in and do the moderation myself, and so it really keeps me, I feel like, from getting detached from the reality of what my readers, my community need and want and expect of me. I don't know, I just love it because it's like I have a whole team of accountability buddies.
So creativity and healing often, intersect in your work. How do you see literature functioning as both therapy and empowerment?
I guess it depends on if it's from the point of the writer or the reader, right? Because, for me as a writer, I don't know, just getting this book, The Weight of Normal, which this book was a heavy weight to to play a pun on it to get it out of me. Writing, because I also write on Substack more frequently than I put out books. It's been very cathartic for me because it really is helpful for me to externally process some things, especially things that are a little harder to put into words. And so a lot of times, like, I'm writing and journaling things that, if I hadn't gotten brave one day and decided to post these things publicly, would have probably just been in a Word document in a journal somewhere on my computer and nobody would have ever seen it, because that's what I used to do when I was younger, is like personal things that weren't fiction, that were just thoughts from my head that weren't necessarily telling a fictional story, would just go in some notebook and nobody would ever see it because I was like, nobody's going to be interested in this. And, it's just been really great to put that out there. And so it's therapeutic for me. And then when my readers read it and they're like, "Oh, this is really validating for me," or one I get that I really love is, "Oh, you just put words to an experience that I've understood but not been able to put words to my whole life. Thank you." And it's like, I am so honored to give you the words. So, because, having the words to explain your experience is such a game changer if you want to advocate for your needs and all kinds of things like that. So, like, those things are really special.
I think that that's amazing, and I'm really glad to hear that. So many emerging authors obviously face barriers in publishing. How do you uplift and amplify their work, or what advice would you share for them?
So if you're a bigger author or, bigger presence on social media, whatever you do, like, it's great to help promote other pages or other authors. And that's something I always try to do, just because I think we are really all stronger together. And, we're up against giants sometimes, especially if you're like a small self-published author. Sometimes something I'll do, which I need to do again, and this you reminded me, which, because it's been a little while, is like I'll, like, whether it's art or books or anything, I'll do, oh, this is something I'm working on right now. What's something you're working on right now? Or this is a project I'm trying to launch. Does anyone else have any projects you would like to share? What are you, this is what I'm writing right now. Are you writing a book right now? And then invite other people to share their things in the comments. And, like, you can do this with crowdfunding too. I'm trying to crowdfund for this. Has anyone else got crowdfunding links? And just, like, opening that dialogue so people can use your space to help find those connections. Or, it's listening to say, I know someone who might like your book. Let me recommend it to them.
All those collaborations, and even what you're doing here with me now, which I very much appreciate. Obviously, with me running the podcast and also being an author, part of the reason I do this is so that I can give back. And also, this is how we cross promote and elevate each other's platforms.
I love that.
And exactly the beauty of community, which is where I happened to find you. And I thought it was just, I had to bring you on. So, back to the interview. What role does storytelling play in shaping cultural memory and collective resilience, especially for marginalized voices in your perspective?
So for me, like, the storytelling is about humanizing things that, and also shining light to experiences that other people might not have considered before. You can tell somebody, oh, this thing hurts autistic people, the fill in the blank thing hurts autistic people, or this thing hurts queer people. But unless you're actually illustrating and giving a human story or an experience for people to really understand and see and envision the harm themselves, it's really hard for people who don't have that particular experience to operate from an experience they don't intimately know themselves. A lot like when we talk about the double empathy problem with autistic people, it's not that we're bad communicators, it's that we communicate differently from those around us. And so, like, we tend to assume everyone experiences the world the same way we do until it shows us that we're not. And storytelling is just a really good way, at least in my experience, to share what it's like to be a person whose identity is marginalized in a society that we're living in, and how, like, I can say this harmed me until I'm blue in the face. But if I go and explain in detail, this is how it harmed me, these are the specific concrete ways I was harmed, and this is how I'm trying to recover from the harm that was done. It's a bit harder for people to argue with when you're like, this is exactly what happened to me in my lived experience. And then, they can hopefully put themselves in your shoes and understand, instead of just being like, well, they say this is harmful, but I don't understand why, because unfortunately, that's what we get a lot of times if people aren't curious enough to want to learn more.
That is true, and people only know what they have been exposed to, so it's hard for them to understand even when you're trying to explain, whereas
Hmm.
storytelling makes them look at it and go, "Oh, so all these things unfolded, and this was the cause and effect of that." Hopefully, it doesn't always happen, but that's the hope, right?
Yeah, the goal.
So, sustaining a writing practice takes immense discipline. How do you stay inspired and grounded through challenges?
So I try to be very realistic with my writing schedules, which is one reason I like self-publishing. Because if there's a publisher, they have a deadline, and that's way more stressful to me. So, because like all I can think about right now is my May 11th deadline for my one I have to do with the publisher next. But like with self-publishing, I like to do where it's like I'm gonna work on this 1 day a week, and that's like not overwhelming because I can think, oh, 1 day a week. That's all I have to do. I have to touch it for 1 day a week. Maybe it's do a chapter, design a cover, work on the website for it. It's like, but it's just 1 day a week. I'm going to do one task or write for a few hours, and I can manage that. 'Cause if I realized a while back when I was starting to figure out like what works for me as far as workflow was that when I would be like, oh, I need to work on this one thing 3 days a week. Well, that makes me get overwhelmed, and then I start to get avoidant of it. And so like I went on a partial hiatus to finish getting this book over the finish line, and I was only working 3 days a week total while I was trying to, and one of those days was the day working on this book, and the other two were writing days, writing for Substack, and then another, like my other writing projects that I do. And so, like, for 2 months, I took it easy where one third of my focus was this, but it was still only 1 day a week. And that was really manageable. And like for me, I found that when I am very refreshed and well rested, and I work less hours, I can actually get way more words out in a day, in a session, than if I'm tired and I'm dragging through cement. And I've been working 5 days a week. So, like, right now, I'm back to working 5 days a week, trying to do all the things that I put off while we were on hiatus for the last 2 months. It's dragging me down, but like the inspiration often comes in those quiet in between moments when I'm not sitting at a computer, and then I go sit at the computer one of those days and sit and get it all out. But for me, I've noticed as an artist, whether that's visual arts or writing or any kind of art I do, I need that quiet in between space time where I'm like just letting my brain kind of free wander so the stuff can bubble up from wherever it is it's coming from.
So, I know that you just put this book out today, but what have been some of the most affirming or surprising moments you've experienced since publishing Weight of Normal?
I will say with this one, I was I didn't get feedback before I put it out. Before I put the button and clicked it and said release it on the date. And so I did that, and it already meant there's no going back, there's no changing it. And then I asked for feedback for people. And so that was really scary because it's like, oh, what if the reviewers come back and tell me that this is garbage? What have I done? And then it's too late. And then you know, I sent out to like 3 people who are people I trusted, and all the feedback came back, and it was like overwhelmingly positive. One of them, someone was like, "You need to make this one chapter longer," and I was like, "I get it, and maybe in a revision I will, but it's kind of like not ready to. There's not more to that part of the story yet, I guess. So I can't add things yet. But other than that, the rest of that person's feedback was still really, really good, and so that's just really exciting to see people I really trust and people whose feedback I really value, because I only sent out to like some people that were really close to me because I was kind of nervous with this project. And just having that come back with, you have something very special here that people need to see and people need to read. And I was like, oh, yay. So just that experience so far. And I got another review back from it today that I haven't got permission to share yet. But it's just exciting, and I'm hoping to see, like, what the rest of the reviews are, and I can't even see what the numbers are yet because it, like, literally just launched today, so I can't even see how many have sold or anything, and so it's like, hopefully it's going out there. Hopefully it happens.
So, how do you hope that your writing shifts the way that society views creativity, neurodivergence, and legacy?
I think the biggest one for me is, like, how we view neurodivergent people and also just people who just like, anyone you think is not following the status quo, but really just seeing that forcing everyone to assimilate into something that is normal to you or normal to some people might be really damaging, and we need to let people exist and be their most authentic selves, and hopefully people will just be more curious with one another, regardless of if we know if we're neurodivergent or not. It's hard to know, and just people will think more about the fact that we are all unique, and we might be having a different experience, and so we need to be less judgmental and more curious in how we engage with one another.
Absolutely agree with that. So, for listeners who may be struggling with isolation, illness, or creative doubt, what message of hope would you like to share with them?
Don't give up, because when I started my blog 9 years ago, I was very physically and mentally unwell. Learning I was autistic came right at a crisis point where I was having really bad ideation and wasn't sure I wanted to exist anymore, and then I was basically in such bad burnout and survival mode that I was just barely making it through work, coming home sick, crashing out, and not going out, not having a social life, not doing anything, but just barely surviving. And it took me probably 5 years to climb out of that burnout, and all of that had to do with starting to really redesign my life around my needs and figuring out, like, how to listen to myself and figure out what I actually really wanted instead of what was expected of me. And, even, like, starting the blog and doing the blog, it's like I did it when I was barely functioning as a person, and it was kind of giving me life and keeping me going, and 9 years later, my life is in such a much better place that the person I was 9 years ago couldn't possibly conceive it. And so it's just, things are hard sometimes, but things do get better. You can do it, and even if it's like I said, you're just working on it one day a week, or 1 hour a week. Don't compare yourself to other people and other people's pace. Like, work at your own pace. My first book, Workplace Neurodiversity Rising, took years, years to get out, and I think a lot of that has to do with how I was just really burnt out through a big part of when I was trying to put it together. But, it's okay to move at a different pace, and it's okay to have grace and patience with yourself, because, if you don't have grace and patience with yourself, who's gonna do it for you, unfortunately.
That is very true. So, what projects, manuscripts, or expansions are you most excited about in the future?
Right now that I've just finished The Weight of Normal, I am going to be working with Rebecca Doofus on an adult version of our children's workbook, Autism, Identity, and Me. And Autism, Identity, and Me, the one that exists now, is a practical workbook for children around age 10 plus to help them learn about what being autistic means to them on an individual level, and helping them to become really bold and affirmed in their autistic identities and help them advocate for themselves. And I had this overwhelming feedback that there should be an adult version, and we just signed the contract to do the adult book, and all of our materials are due on May 11th. So that's the big thing I'm really excited about. And now it's like I actually have a deadline, and this thing has to come to life. So that'll be coming soon, and I'm really excited about that one.
That sounds awesome. I might have to have you come back when you get ready for that launch.
Oh, that would be great. Rebecca would probably be happy to join me too if you want to have both of us.
That would be awesome. We'll have to talk about that in the near future.
Yes, please.
So, finally, what do you envision for the future of your writing and the communities that it touches?
I realized when I started writing The Weight of Normal recently, or I started working on The Weight of Normal, I have two other books in my folders that I started and never finished. So I've got another neurodiversity book that's more general that I need to finish and get out. And I, I've got endless books that are always coming. And so I hope I get to do more. I don't really know what direction I'll get pulled in, because in true ADHD fashion, I'm always going in a million directions at once. But I'm really excited that I get to do something that I really love doing. And, that I have the community behind me to do it, which is what really makes it possible, and especially, like, self-publishing. It's like, having that group of people helping support me. This is why another reason I say, I don't know exactly where I'm going next other than, the workbook that's just been signed, because the community may go, "Hey, we need this thing really needs to exist," and then I may put everything aside and start working on something new, which is always possible.
I can relate to that. Constantly have something coming up and 50 million works in progress. So, Lyric, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your wisdom, and your vision with us today. Your work reminds us that storytelling is not just about imagination, it's also about resilience, healing, and legacy. And to our listeners, may you carry forward the inspiration that Lyric has offered and remember that creativity is a form of empowerment. Until next time, this has been The Mind of Cy Marie.